Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a lesser-told chapter of medieval life. Not the feasts of kings or the spice-laced dishes of noble courts, but the food of survival. The quiet, clever, and often desperate ways medieval peasants fed themselves through years of scarcity, harsh winters, and poor harvests. These were meals built on instinct, not instruction. Stews that bubbled with whatever could be foraged, dried, or begged. Bread made from ground-up roots and weeds when flour ran out. Strategies, not recipes designed not to satisfy, but to endure. It's a story of resourcefulness, resilience, and a kind of culinary courage that kept entire villages alive through the leanest times. Now, dim the lights and imagine the scent of boiled barley and wood smoke in the air. This is what it took to survive when hunger was the main ingredient. You wake up because your stomach bites before anything else does. The rooster's still asleep. The sun won't show its face for hours, but your gut? It's doing cartwheels, as if it might digest itself out of spite. You curl tighter beneath your blanket, a term used very generously for this worm-eaten, flea-inhabited, goat-stinking rag, and hope you can squeeze one more dream out of the night. You can't. The cold gnaws at your bones like it's personal. Your breath hangs in the air, a visible reminder that your cottage has no insulation, no fireplace in the sleeping room, and definitely no mercy. The straw mattress beneath you smells faintly of mold, sweat, and possibly a dead rat from last harvest. You shift and something crunches under the straw. You pretend it's nothing. In this house, ignorance is a survival strategy. You share this space with 6 other bodies: your parents, 3 siblings, and 1 very flatulent grandfather. Everyone's pressed together like poorly folded laundry, chasing whatever warmth each other's skin can provide. That's the only heat source you've got, and most nights it's more farts than fire. Outside, the wind howls like a curse. Inside, someone coughs up what might have been part of a lung. A chicken clucks indignantly from beneath the shared bench bed. Your little brother rolls over and elbows you in the ribs. His elbow is made entirely of hunger and bone. You are awake now. And that means you're behind. Because in your world, being awake means you need to start moving. Every wasted minute is a chance to go colder, hungrier, or if luck's really against you, dead. You swing your legs over the side of the sleeping platform. The floor is packed earth, recently frozen, now thawing into something worse. You step carefully to avoid the icy puddle near the door, the one that smells suspiciously like the corner your grandfather pees in when he can't be bothered to go outside. Welcome to your kitchen, living room, bedroom, and stable, all in one charming space. You head to the hearth, or rather, what's left of it. The fire's nothing but sullen ash now. You poke it with a charred stick and whisper threats. After a minute or two, you coax one last ember out of it. It's like resuscitating a dying animal. It gurgles, wheezes, and catches. You feed it kindling and pray it returns the favor with heat. Your mother is already up. She's stirring something in the pot. You recognize the smell immediately, because it's the same smell every day. Pottage. It's not a new batch. Of course not. That pot hasn't been cleaned since ever. The stew inside is older than your youngest sister. It simmers eternally, like a medieval version of Hell's crockpot. If someone fell in, you're not sure they'd even notice. The top layer is from yesterday, maybe the day before. The bottom? You don't ask. New ingredients are added as old ones disappear. You once saw a beet go in. A week later, it came back out looking like an artifact. Yesterday's addition was a rat's tail. Today, it might be a turnip. Might be a toe. No one cares. If it's warm and fills the stomach, it qualifies as food. You tear a piece of barley bread from the stack. Stack, again being generous. It's more like a pile of hard disks masquerading as food. You could use it as a weapon if needed, and people have. It's rock hard, crusted with ash from the hearth, and smells vaguely like mildew. You dip it in the pottage to soften it. That's the trick. That's why the pottage is always going. It's not just a meal. It's the source of survival, the great medieval softener, the reason your jaw isn't broken in 3 places. You take a bite, it's not the worst thing you've eaten. That honor goes to the time your cousin mistook pig fat for soap. The aftermath of that was a lesson for all involved. You chew slowly, trying not to count the number of unidentifiable floaters in your bowl. There's a brown sliver that might be mushroom, or ear, or bark. The suspense is half the flavor. Outside, the light is beginning to break a sickly grey smear across the horizon. Not sunlight, not really. Just a reminder that you'll soon be expected to do things, physical things, with this body, powered by a cup of hot sludge and a chunk of day-old cement bread. Today is a work day. Of course, every day is a work day. Rest is for nobles and corpses. You will walk to the fields, hoe in hand. You'll spend hours bent over, turning soil that doesn't want to be turned. Your back will scream, your hands will bleed. You'll pause at midday to eat another lump of this same bread, washed down with a cup of weak ale that your neighbor brewed in a bucket. You'll try not to think about how many of the barley grains had worms in them, or what floated to the surface during fermentation. You'll work until the sun dips behind the trees again. Then you'll return to this house, with its damp corners and smoky ceiling, and you'll eat more pottage, slightly older pottage, slightly more sinister pottage. And you'll sleep. Not restfully, not well, but deep enough to forget you're still hungry. But sometimes, in the hour between waking and working before the chores begin, before the others rouse, you stare into the pottage pot and wonder what's even in it anymore. Because this pot, this bubbling, ancient, godless soup, it has seen things, and it's about to be your breakfast. Again. You reach for the ladle with a kind of reverence, or fear. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. You stare at the pot, the ladle rests against the rim like it's given up. And, honestly, you don't blame it. This is not just a meal. This is a legacy. A fluid, bubbling, occasionally shrieking legacy. This is pottage, your breakfast, lunch, dinner, and culinary prison. The one meal to rule them all, and the only thing standing between you and starvation. The pot has not been emptied in you don't know how long. Nobody does. You were born into this pot, you will probably die with this pot still half full. It sits there day and night, chained to the hearth like some unholy relic, always hot, always hungry. New food goes in. Old food disappears. The broth gets thicker, the flavor gets weirder, the rules are simple. If it can boil, it belongs. And if it moves, well, depends on how fast. You lift the lid. A puff of steam escapes and carries with it the scent of 8 Tuesdays ago. You see a layer of oily fat, a floating carrot top, and something green that's either a turnip leaf or the beginning of a curse. You stir. The ladle makes a slurp-slop sound as it drags through the muck. Somewhere in the depths, something bobs up half an onion, the end of a leek, possibly a knucklebone. You don't ask questions. You don't get answers. You just serve. Pottage isn't just food. It's a lifestyle, a survival tactic. The only cooking method available when your kitchen consists of a fire, a spoon, and a very optimistic attitude. The base? Always grains. Whatever's cheapest and most miserable that season. Barley, rye, or oats. You boil them until they surrender into mush. Then you throw in vegetables, turnips, leeks, cabbage, onions, whatever didn't rot or get stolen by a goat. Herbs? Sure, if you're lucky. Parsley, garlic, maybe a few sage leaves you scavenged from behind the church if the guards weren't looking. Meat? Only on feast days, or feast-adjacent days. Or when something dies nearby and no one's looking. Sometimes, a sliver of salted pork is dropped in. Not for eating, no. That would be too luxurious. It's more of a suggestion, a whisper of meat. A single fatty cube meant to haunt the entire pot with flavor. You remember once your father caught a rabbit and dropped its bones into the pot? You talked about that soup for a month. You think your sister wrote a song about it. You've heard that the rich eat pottage too. That's what makes you laugh. Sure, they call it pottage, but theirs is a crime against empathy. They add saffron, cinnamon, wine. You saw one noble add dried figs and call it nourishing. You weren't sure if you should laugh, cry, or throw your spoon at him. Meanwhile, your version is more, whatever's dying in the garden, liquefied. Still, you can't deny it. Pottage keeps you alive. One bowl in the morning, another before sundown. Maybe a scoop if you wake in the night, with hunger gnawing at your ribs like a bored wolf. It sits there, on the fire, always hot, always changing. Like a medieval version of a compost bin, but somehow edible. Your mother calls it eternal stew. You call it soup with memory loss, because no two bites ever taste the same. One might be barley and onion, the next, scorched garlic and wood chip. One time you're pretty sure you ate a feather. It was crunchy. You once asked how long a single pottage pot could go. Your grandfather stared into the fire and said, "I think ours remembers your great-great-uncle." You didn't ask again. Historical records confirm it. Some pottage pots stayed cooking for days, even weeks, without being emptied. One study of food remains at a medieval site in Warham, Percy. Found traces of long-boiled grain residue embedded in hearth pots, layered like tree rings, edible to spare. There was no meal prep, no daily dinner. There was just this, a cauldron, a living organism of boiling carbs and seasonal regret. You didn't so much eat dinner as you checked in on it like a sick relative. And it wasn't just dinner. It was utility. The hot pot warmed the house, softened the bread, washed the wooden spoon, healed the sick, allegedly. Bored? Stir the pot. Sad? Stir the pot. Need a reason to believe in reincarnation? Look at what came out of the pot this morning. Of course, there were rules. Unspoken, but absolute. Don't ever let the pot run dry. That's how you end up with burned grain cemented to the bottom until next winter. Don't talk about what you saw in the pot. If it didn't blink, it's fine. Don't eat directly from the pot. That's how Uncle Harold got whacked with a ladle. But perhaps the most important rule, don't ever trust a fresh pot. Fresh pottage tastes clean. And that's unnatural. It's missing the ancestral tang, the ghost of onions past. It hasn't had time to skin its own dread yet. Fresh pottage is rookie pottage. It doesn't have depth, or body, or that smoky aftertaste of, "We almost forgot to stir it this morning." You hear, the noble kitchens clean their pots daily. Can you imagine? They scrub out the crust, the fat, the grit. They throw away leftovers, actual, edible food. They start again from scratch on purpose. It's obscene. They eat their pottage with spoons made of silver. You eat yours with a spoon whittled from old fence wood, one that says if you chew too hard. They eat from bowls glazed in glass and gold. You eat from a cracked hunk of pottery that used to be a chamber pot. You're not proud of that. But it's warm, and it holds soup. And those are the two most important criteria in this world. The pottage doesn't judge. It just exists. Endlessly, quietly, resiliently. In this house, it has become something between a food and a deity. Your mother talks to it. Your father curses at it. Your sister once claimed she saw the face of St. Cuthbert in a bubble of turnip foam. You didn't believe her until you saw it too, and you're still not sure it wasn't the mold. But here's the thing. Without pottage, you'd be dead. So you give it respect. You stir it when you pass. You feed it scraps. You feed it yourself. You defend it when outsiders mock it. Because one day, the bread will run out. The beer will sour. The herbs will die. But the pottage, The pottage will still be there, bubbling, waiting, changing, but always yours. You ladle a portion into a bowl and carry it to the bench. You sit down, knees cracking. Your fingers are numb, the bowl warms them. Steam curls into your face. The smell is earthy, familiar, and slightly threatening. You take a bite, and somehow, miraculously, it still tastes like survival. You bite the bread and feel something shift, not in the loaf, but in your jaw. There's a crunch, not from the crust, from your back molar. It's cracked. Again, you spit out a shard that may have been tooth or stone. Hard to tell. The loaf doesn't care. It sits in your hand like a grudge, dense, dark, unyielding, and utterly unapologetic. Medieval bread wasn't made to be chewed. It was made to be endured. You chew again anyway. Because this rock-hard, ash-crusted, mold-speckled thing, this is the cornerstone of your entire existence. It's been 4 days since the communal oven was fired up. That's where your family bakes along with half the village. You don't have an oven of your own. You're not a noble. You're not even middle class. You're just a peasant. And your kitchen tools are fire, stone, and prayer. The bread was soft-ish once. Maybe on day one? Now it could be used in battle. And probably has been. You soak it in the pottage to soften it. It helps. Slightly. If you dunk it long enough, the crust stops fighting you and starts tasting like barley-flavored despair. But if you wait too long, it dissolves into sludge, and you're left holding a fistful of medieval oatmeal brick soup. There is no happy middle ground, just hunger and hope. You eat fast. If you eat slow, your brother gets ideas. He's already eyeing your crust like it owes him money. You grew up on this bread. You'll die eating this bread. You've seen it serve as food, spoon, plate, weapon, pillow, fire starter, and once, regrettably, toilet paper. And somehow, it remains sacred. Because bread isn't just food, it's identity, religion, the closest you'll ever come to abundance, and also the closest you'll ever come to accidental poisoning. You see, the grain you use isn't wheat. That's reserved for the people with gold, horses, and functioning teeth. You get rye, sometimes barley, often a tragic mix of whatever wasn't stolen by birds or nobles. If the crop was especially poor, you stretch it with peas, beans, acorns, or when things are truly grim, tree bark. No, really. Tree bark. You watched your grandmother grind it once. She called it survival flour. It was grey, bitter, and nearly impossible to chew. It was also the only thing that kept you from collapsing during the winter famine of 1315. But even when you have actual grain, things can go wrong. Rye, you see, is a drama queen. It harbors ergot, a toxic fungus that flourishes in damp seasons. Bake it into bread, and you've got yourself a lovely little hallucinogen, or poison, or both. They call it St. Anthony's fire. Your uncle called it the dancing plague. He said the bread made the villagers twitch, babble, and try to run headfirst into walls. He laughed when he told you. Then he wept. Then he stopped talking altogether. You remember chewing a green speckled loaf once. That was the night the moon started blinking at you. Since then, you've gotten more cautious. You peel the mold. You sniff for sourness. You check for streaks of strange color. You pray the rats didn't get to it first. Still, you eat it. Because hunger doesn't care if the bread might bite back. Most days, it's all you've got. And you need a lot of it. The average peasant like you burn through 2 to 3 pounds of bread a day. That's your energy. Your fuel, your pre-workout, post-workout, midday snack, and midnight emergency ration. Bread fills the belly when nothing else does. And on most days, nothing else is available. You chew slowly. Your jaw aches. The The crust digs into your gums like it's auditioning to be a torture device. But you don't stop. There's salt in this one. A gift. A miracle. Probably stolen. You don't ask questions. Salt makes bread taste like something. It wakes it up, lends it flavor, reminds you this isn't just a compressed ball of failure and famine, it's food. Sort of. You think about how different bread is for the nobles. You've seen them pass by in their wagons, trays of golden, soft manchette loaves in hand. White bread, real wheat, baked that morning, fluffy, fragile. It would melt in your mouth. You wouldn't know what to do with it. They don't chew their bread. They dab it with meat drippings, wipe their fingers with it, feed it to dogs. You chew yours like it owes you money. Their bread is luxury. Yours is labor. And labor demands calories. That's where bread shines. It's heavy, dense, a compact little sack of starch and grit. It keeps you upright when your knees want to buckle. When you've spent 12 hours hauling stones or digging through half-frozen dirt for root vegetables, bread is what gets you home. You've chewed your bread, gnawed your crust, soaked it in pottage, and washed it down with ale, and still your stomach isn't full. Not really. Not deeply. That kind of full is for feasts, for fantasies. And so comes the backup plan. The safety net for your hunger, the peasant's final defense against collapse, the greyest, gloomiest ghost of a meal. Gruel. Not porridge. Not stew. Not soup. Gruel. It doesn't pretend to be anything else. It is, by its very nature, the bare minimum of food, a whisper of grain drowned in an ocean of hot water. You ladle it from a blackened pot that's been boiled dry more times than you can count. You've seen what gruel looks like after 5 hours on the fire. You've seen what it looks like when left uncovered overnight in the smoke. You've seen what it looks like cold, and it's worse. And yet, somehow, it always comes back. Gruel is what happens when there's nothing left to eat, but you refuse to give up. It's what you make from the sweepings at the bottom of the flour bin, from barley dust, from oat scrapings, from millet fragments that didn't make it into the bread dough. You scoop it into your bowl, if it can be called a scoop. It's more of a drip. It sloshes. It sighs. It smells like boiled nothing. And yet it's yours. You eat it slowly, with the same reverence someone else might show to a roast pig. The first spoonful is warm. That's something. The second tastes like ash. Also something. By the third, you stop tasting at all. Gruel doesn't reward you. It doesn't comfort or console. It simply fills, and only barely. It coats your insides like damp cloth. It tells your brain, we've eaten now, even if your stomach disagrees. You remember the first time you were fed gruel? You were 6, fevered, pale. The healer said stew would be too heavy. So your mother boiled grain into paste and strained it until it ran thin. She fed it to you with a carved spoon, you cried. She didn't stop. She knew what you didn't. That gruel is the line between sick and dead. You've seen gruel in the monastery too. The monks eat it during fasts. Quietly, stoically, twice a day during Lent. Once during Holy Weeks. They say it brings them closer to humility. You're not sure about that. What it definitely brings them closer to is flatulence. Still, they eat it. Gruel made with honey when they can afford it. With dried apples. If the orchards were generous, you can smell it from the garden wall. It makes you envious, even as you gag. Monastery records from the 12th century list gruel as standard fare for the sick, the poor, the elderly, the fasting, the unlucky, and sometimes all at once. They stretch a cup of oats to feed 10 people. Less than 2 tablespoons per person. And call it charity. Your neighbor feeds it to her baby. No breast milk left. No goat milk either. Just water and oats and a pinch of salt if the child is lucky. That child cries through the night. Gruel can't stop it. Gruel can't nourish it. but it keeps the child alive. For now, you've seen babies weaned on gruel. You've seen old men die with a bowl of it cooling beside them. You've seen your uncle try to flavor it with tree sap and nearly poison himself. You've also seen what happens when there's no gruel. It's worse. During famine years, the gruel becomes the only food that can be made. You soak the grain for days, boil it for hours, hope it doesn't burn, hope it thickens just enough to not be mistaken for bath water. You know how to stir it just right, how to skim the scum from the top. You know that if it gets too thin, it's water. Too thick, it's porridge. And porridge is a luxury now. Gruel is for when even porridge is out of reach. It's not a side dish. It's the main course, the only course. And you eat it with the same slow, mechanical movements that built this land's stone walls. Spoon, slurp, grit your teeth. Swallow. Repeat. There are those who say gruel has no taste. You disagree. It has a taste. It tastes like duty. It tastes like a mother feeding her child the last grain in the house. It tastes like a monk on his knees, spooning cold oats in the dark. It tastes like famine with the edges shaved off. Gruel may be thin, but the lives it holds together are thick with suffering. And you eat it anyway. Because you have to. Because it's food. And even bad food is better than none. You once heard someone say gruel was a humble meal. That's a lie, told by people who've never had to eat it 3 times a day for a week. Gruel isn't humble. It's humbling. It strips you of appetite, pride, and occasionally your will to chew. And the worst part? There's never quite enough of it. You remember one winter where gruel was all you had morning, noon, and night. Your mother used the last of the oats and mixed them with water pulled from a snowmelt puddle near the stable. You watched as she stirred it with hands too red to feel the heat. When she served it, she smiled and said, "It's warm. That's enough." You pretended to believe her. The thing about gruel is, it teaches you that survival is less about food and more about ritual. It doesn't nourish the body so much as it tricks the mind. You eat it not because it tastes good, not because it fills you, but because it marks the moment, the gesture, the act of trying. And sometimes that's all you can do. You've seen beggars lined up outside monastery gates, tin bowls in hand, waiting for the day's ladle. You've seen men cry over a splash of warm barley broth, not because it tasted good, but because it was something they didn't have to steal. There's dignity in that, a quiet one, a cracked dignity, boiled until thin. Once you tried to spice your gruel with crushed berries you found near the hedge. They looked like elderberries. They weren't. You vomited for 2 days and missed the planting. Your father said nothing, just gave you a stick to help you stand. You ate your gruel in silence after that, and never touched hedgeberries again. You learned the hard way that flavor is a risk, and survival means eating safe, even if safe tastes like boiled regret. Gruel rarely changes. It has no chapters, no surprises. It's never exciting, never interesting, but it's there. There, during the plagues, when every other house in your village was draped in cloth and silence. There, during the harvests that failed, the springs that came late, the summers that burned the soil dry. Gruel is the food that outlives good times and shows up when the bad times move in to stay. And when even gruel fails, when there's not enough grain to dust the bottom of a pot, you know you've crossed a line. You're in the death season now. That's when people eat bark. That's when soup gets made from boiled shoe leather. That's when children cry not because they're picky, but because their bodies are starting to eat themselves. That's when gruel starts to look like luxury. But on better days, on days when the field gives just enough, when the oats don't mold, when the water is clean and the fire is strong, gruel becomes something else. Not a punishment, not a placeholder, but a promise. That things could, however, briefly, stay the same. You stir the pot, add just a pinch more salt, Maybe a stray wild herb if the wind was good to you that morning. You serve it to your family. They don't thank you. They just eat. And in that quiet, scraping, chewing silence, there's something like peace. Something like survival. And that's more than enough. You don't dream of turnips. No one dreams of turnips. You eat them, you stew them, you mash them, you curse them, but do not dream of them. And yet, when winter leans in with its icy breath, and the pottage grows thin and the bread too hard to crack, it's not meat you crave, not honey, not even warmth. It's the turnip. Ugly, bland, abundant, the root of all misery, and the reason you're still breathing. You pull one from the dirt, the soil clinging to its skin like a second, muddier hide. It looks like something that should have been thrown away 3 harvests ago. Pale purple, misshapen, cracked down one side. But when you slice it, it bleeds white. You toss it into the pot. No seasoning, no oil, just water and heat. And you pray it boils faster this time. Because tonight, like most nights, turnip is dinner. You remember the first time your family relied on turnips alone. It was a bad year. The rains came late, the barley failed, and 2 villages over, a family was caught eating tree bark soaked in ale to stay alive. You had turnips, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, dug from the edge of the common fields and stashed in pits beneath your cottage like buried treasure, if treasure was bitter and gaseous and gave everyone the runs. They fed you for months. They filled the pottage. They stretched the bread. They gave your stomach something to fight over. By spring, you hated them. But you loved that you had survived. And that's what turnips are. Not food. Insurance. They grow in the worst dirt, on land where even weeds roll their eyes and walk away. You can forget them, abuse them, dig them up with your bare hands, and they'll still give you 10 pounds of edible roots per plant if the weather doesn't misbehave too much. No other crop loves neglect quite like the turnip. You store them in pits lined with straw and prayer. Deep pits, dry ones, dug behind the barn or under the sleeping floor if you're desperate. The smell leaks into everything. Into your clothes, into your skin, into your dreams, if you're unlucky. You breathe turnips, you sweat turnips. Your chamber pot smells like turnips before you even relieve yourself. But when the snows come and the fields freeze, and everyone else is gnawing on rotten cabbage and dried beans, you still have food. Rotten cabbage and turnips, that's practically a feast. You boil them, you mash them, you eat them raw when you're too tired to cook. You fry the skins on hot stones when the roots are gone. Even the leaves, if you pick them early, go into the pot. Nothing is wasted. Not the roots, not the tops, not your patience, because that was gone 3 weeks ago. Some call turnips the bread of the poor. That's generous. Bread has dignity. Bread has structure. Bread can be carried, traded, broken at a wedding, buried with the dead. Turnips just rot. But they rot slowly. And that makes them precious. Manor records from 1,286 mention villages, surviving 7 months on turnip stores alone. You believe it. You lived it. One winter you had nothing but turnips, ale, and the occasional boiled bone. You've never farted so violently in your life. Your sister swore she saw God after a 3rd straight week of boiled root stew. You're still not convinced she didn't? You hear tales of nobles who sneer at turnips, who refuse to eat them unless they're roasted in goose fat or stuffed with dried fruits. You'd like to invite one of them to your home, show them the pit, serve them a boiled root, and watch the color drain from their powdered face. Then offer seconds. The thing about turnips is that they're everywhere, and yet somehow never quite enough. They shrink in the pot. They evaporate into air and smell. You boil 5 pounds and end up with a meal barely worth chewing. But still you chew, because you've tried not chewing, you've tried fasting, skipping, stretching what you had. That's when the shaking starts. That's when your vision blurs. That's when your grandfather starts talking about the time he buried a rat in the turnip bin and forgot which one was which. You don't want to relive that. So you eat your roots and say thank you. Some days you get fancy. You add a pinch of salt, a clove of garlic if you remembered to hide one from the tax collector, or, if you're really feeling wild, a shred of pork fat left over from butchering day. That one shred makes the whole pot taste like ambition. It makes the turnips taste like memory. Like you once ate food with flavor, with soul, with joy. You stir the pot a little slower on days like that. You eat slower, too. Because who knows when it'll happen again? Even the village healer swears by them. Turnips drive out the winter melancholy, she says, mashing a boiled root into a cloth for some poor soul's chest. She also said they help with coughs, toothaches, and witch curses. But mostly, she just likes the smell, says it reminds her of survival. You don't argue. In a world where everything is dying, the turnip lives. That's enough to make it holy. 1 year, a monk passed through and taught your mother how to pickle them. That was the year your father couldn't poop for 6 days. After that, you stuck with boiling. You remember sitting around the hearth one night, the pot bubbling, the windows sealed tight, the smell got so thick you could bite it. Your cousin made the mistake of opening the door too quickly and nearly fainted. Turnips are like that. They're not just food. They're an event. The kind you never look forward to but attend anyway because you have no other option. But when the spring comes and the first green leaf sprouts and the bread softens and the ale turns clear, what's the first thing you do? You walk to the pit. You take the last turnip from storage. You hold it up to the light, and you throw it as far from your house as your weak, winter-worn arms will allow. It thuds on the ground, rolls once, and comes to rest in the mud. You don't care. You're done. Until next winter. Somewhere between the turnip pit and the pottage pot, salvation grows in silence. Not loud, not proud, just quietly stubborn. Beans, peas, the music makers of the medieval poor. You don't remember the first time you ate them. You just know they've always been there on your plate, in your bowl, or mashed into a paste and slapped onto stale bread. They are the food of work, the food of labor, the food that smells worse coming up than it did going in. And yet they are glorious. Peas and beans are the closest thing you'll ever get to meat. Not meat adjacent, not flavored like, not in the same room as, just necessary. Because where meat comes from pigs, and pigs belong to the Lord, beans come from your own dirt, quietly, freely, generously. You plant them in between rows of barley. Or, after the oats are done, they don't need much. They fix their own nitrogen, whatever that means. The priest says it's a miracle. The healer says it's witchcraft. You say it's supper. When they grow everywhere, crawling up sticks, through fences, into your neighbor's fields if you don't keep watch. Vines full of pods, pods full of seeds, seeds full of hope. You dry them, store them, hoard them. Because in winter, when the meat's long gone and the turnips have turned on you, these little legumes become your best chance at staying upright. You eat them mashed, always mashed, boiled until they collapse into themselves, then stirred with a stick until they resemble something halfway between porridge and wall plaster. Add salt if you're lucky, garlic if you're blessed. Nothing if you're typical. Scoop it with bread, if you have bread. Drink it straight. If you don't, it's not bad, it's not good either, but it's dense, fulfilling, full of whatever peasants need to keep from collapsing in the fields. 1 bowl and you can haul rocks till dusk. 2 bowls and you can chase pigs. 3, and you can carry a sheep uphill while arguing with your uncle about church taxes. But there's a cost. And the cost is wind. You've never known bloating until you've eaten 3-day-old bean mash reheated with cabbage water. You've never prayed for silence like you have during morning mass, holding in a sin louder than any sermon. The old men call it field thunder. The children giggle through it. The women pretend it's a cough. The monks just give up. You once heard of a monastery that banned beans on holy days, not because of gluttony, but because of the acoustics. One novice tried to light a candle too close to the wrong end of a gassy fryer. The flames went out. The memory did not. But the gas is a fair trade, because peas and beans are life. They fill your belly. They strengthen your legs. They keep your hands from shaking when the frost creeps in too early and the bread runs out too soon. And more than that, they last. Dried peas and beans, kept in clay pots or old ale barrels, can last for years. You've eaten beans older than your little sister, beans your grandfather planted. Beans passed down like stories, like spoons, like grudges. In a world where most food molds, rots, spoils, or vanishes, beans remain. They are the only thing in your kitchen that doesn't turn against you. You once heard of a family that lived a whole month on nothing but dried peas and bitter ale. They survived. They smelled terrible, but they survived. You admire them. You've nearly been them. Some years there's so much pea mash in the house, your dreams start tasting green. You've tried to change it up, fried them once, didn't go well, baked them, burned them, ground them into flour, and made flatbread that crumbled like your aunt's memory. But still you try, still you cook. Because every time you sit down with a bowl of mashed peas, you remember what it's like to not have them, to wake up to an empty pot, to watch your brother chew boiled bark, to see your mother stare into the storage jar and find nothing but dust and mice droppings. In those moments, you would sell your soul for a handful of legumes. So now, you never complain. Not out loud, anyway. The lords don't eat peas. Or, if they do, they mash them with cream and mix in saffron and nuts and call it something foreign. You once delivered a sack of lentils to the manor kitchen. The cook sniffed at it and called it poor people food. You nodded, smiled, carried home the coppers they gave you, then made yourself a lentil stew so thick it stood up in the bowl. Poor people food is survival food, and survival food is rich in a different way. You've paid taxes in beans, settled debts with peas, once traded a sack of chickpeas for a knife that only rusted after stabbing 3 wild dogs. It was a good knife. You've used split peas to fill holes in the wall, to weigh down the bottom of your cloak, to make a child's rattle. You've seen monks count them like rosary beads during fasts. You've buried them with the dead. You've spilled them on the floor and cried because you knew what they were worth. Because every little green dot is a promise. You will eat. You will work. You will live. Even if you stink up the entire village doing it. Some peasants even give their beans names. You scoffed at first until you caught yourself whispering to the pot after it boiled over one too many times, apologizing, thanking it, asking it to not go sour this time. Because when you've eaten the same thing every day for 30 days straight, it stops being just food. It becomes a companion, a fixture, a burden you hate but never want to lose. There's comfort in repetition. Comfort in knowing that even when everything else fails, when the cow dies, the bread molds, the grain barn floods your old clay pot of dried broad beans, is still sitting in the corner, waiting. You don't fear hunger as much when you know it's there. At weddings, you mix them with barley. At funerals, you mash them fine and serve them with wine, if the monk's feeling generous. During plague years, you boil them with wild garlic and pretend it's soup. They never taste good, but they never let you down. Even the rich, when pressed, when war or sickness or debt strips their tables bare, they eat what you eat. They turn to the fields, to the legumes, to the food of those they once sneered at, and they discover what you've always known. It's not about flavor. It's about not falling over. You wipe your bowl with a crust of bread, crack a loud, involuntary fart. Your sister throws a spoon at you. You don't flinch. You're full. You're tired. You'll live. That's the power of peas. Meat doesn't come easy to your kind. It walks past you, bleats in the field beside you. You feed it, milk it, and shovel its filth, but you don't eat it. Not unless it dies. Not unless the Lord lets you. Not unless you're very lucky. Or very sneaky. When meat finally reaches your hands, it's not a roast. It's not ribs or thigh or belly. It's not even what you'd call edible by sight. It's scrap, gut, gristle, guts, blood, bone. And you make it work. Because if there's one thing peasants have perfected, it's the art of making a meal from what others would bury. The slaughter begins at dawn. You're not allowed near the main butchering. That's the Lord's domain, his cattle, his hogs, his fattened fowl, his cuts. You get the rest. The parts no one wants. The parts too awkward, too messy, too foul-smelling for noble plates. You wait by the side of the slaughter shed with your sack and your bowl, nodding to the steward, pretending not to notice how little he thinks of you. He tosses you a lung, maybe a stomach, on a good day, a snout, on a very good day, brains. You don't thank him, you just nod. Then you run home like you've stolen gold. You clean the scraps with water drawn before sunrise, you scrape off hair, you peel back membranes. You pray the dog doesn't steal anything while your back's turned. Then you cook. You boil the lungs until they deflate like old leather. You fry the ears in their own grease. You slice the liver thin and burn it just enough to kill the taste of bile. The children eat quietly on slaughter days, even the fussy ones. They know not to waste a bite. Your cousin once got a whole pig's head. You helped him carry it back. The eyes still stared. The jaw hung loose. The smell was raw, coppery, and unholy. But you boiled it. You picked it apart. The cheeks were tender. The tongue soft. The ears crisped up in fat. And made the best snack you've had all year. The brain? Scrambled with garlic and spread on stale bread. You don't talk about how it tasted. It tasted like survival. It tasted like you had done something forbidden and won. You've heard the rich say, peasants don't know how to cook. They say this while a cook bastes duck in wine beside a blazing hearth. You boil 3 organs in the same pot and make it taste like feast. You take blood, mix it with oats and herbs, stuff it in a cleaned intestine, and make pudding. Yes, it jiggles. Yes, it looks like regret. But it's meat, and that's enough. When nothing's left, you make bone broth. Not trendy, not gourmet, just what happens when there's no flesh and too much hunger. You boil bones for hours, days, if you have the firewood. The marrow turns to fat. The water thickens. The smell becomes a warning and a blessing. You sip it like medicine. You feed it to the sick, to the old, to the young with hollow cheeks and tired eyes. You've never seen a more grateful face than that of a starving child with a mug of hot bone broth between their hands. You've eaten rat. Not proudly. Not often. But it happened. It was during the bad winter, when even the dogs were thin and the barns were quiet. You caught one in a trap meant for rabbits. It was fat, twitchy, and still warm. You skinned it, boiled it, shared it with your sister under a blanket while the wind rattled the shutters. You didn't talk about it afterward. But you buried the bones like treasure. Because in that moment, that rat was the difference between waking up or not. Some villagers tell stories of old men who could make soup from hooves. Don't know if that's true, but you've tried. The result is chewy, greasy, and tastes like shoe leather steeped in failure. But it fills the stomach. You've eaten hedgehog, roasted in clay. You've eaten sparrow, bones and all. You once tried a fox. Never again. You've seen men punished for stealing a sheep's pluck, heart, liver, and lungs. 2 weeks' wages gone, because offal, to a peasant, is worth its weight in silver. You've also seen nobles throw it away, not out of cruelty, but indifference. They don't need to make meat from scraps. You do. And that's why you treat every part of the beast like sacred text. You boil the hooves, roast the bones, pickle the tongue, dry the tripe, and sing hymns to the fat. You render it, store it, smear it on bread, use it to waterproof your boots, soften your hands, and grease your tools. Fat is treasure. Fat is fire. Fat is life. Some say peasants don't eat meat. They're wrong. You just don't eat parts that look like meat. You eat the leftovers, the organs, the fringe, and somehow, you make it taste like victory. You've learned to listen to the animals before a slaughter. The pigs squeal in the distance, shrill, panicked, almost human. The cows don't make much noise, just shift their weight, thick and slow, as if they know their time has come and simply resent the schedule. It never gets easier. But it never gets skipped. Every part is used because it has to be. The intestines? Washed and twisted into sausage casings. You don't like the smell. No one does. But once they're stuffed with grain, blood, and whatever scraps are left, they turn into something worth chewing. You've eaten sausages so pungent they made your eyes water and your hands tremble with joy. The bladder makes a good pouch. The skin, dried into a water flask or patched into a shoe. Nothing is waste. Not in your world. And if it's not your animal, if it's poached, you don't tell anyone. You've seen men hanged for hunting rabbits on a noble's land, for setting snares for birds, for stealing a wounded deer that would have died anyway. The Lord's forest is sacred, which is to say, it's forbidden. But hunger doesn't care for boundaries or feudal law. So sometimes, at night, you go walking with a crooked stick and a sack. You've eaten squirrel stew, badger soup, hedgehog roasted in clay, and once, during a particularly bad winter, something your uncle insisted was just a big wild cat. It tasted like shame. But you lived. And meat isn't just food. It's a gathering. When the pig is slaughtered your own, if you're lucky, everyone comes. Neighbors help. Children peek around corners. The blood runs hot into a bucket, and someone is already stirring it with oats. The head is removed clean, the tail saved for soup. It's messy, loud, smells of iron and steam. But it's also the closest thing you have to celebration. The best cuts are gone fast, shared, or saved, or salted down. The rest gets cooked and eaten before it spoils. That night, no one goes to bed hungry. That night, you remember what it's like to eat fat without rationing it, to bite into meat and have it fight back with juice and texture instead of guilt. That night, you sit around the fire, greasy hands and full bellies, and feel for just a moment like a king. You wish you could bottle the feeling. You wish you could salt that joy and bury it beside the pork fat and pickled feet in your cold cellar. But you know it won't last. Meat in a peasant's life never does. By the end of the week, you're back to beans and turnips and stale bread soaked in broth. The only thing left of the slaughter is the smell in your clothes and the memory on your tongue. But you carry that memory. You let it linger, because even scraps can be sacred. You don't live near the sea. You've never seen it, never smelled it. You can't even picture that much water in one place. And yet you eat fish. Not fresh fish, not grilled trout on a silver plate like they show in the Lord's feasts. What reaches you is stiff, briny, and smells like a monk's laundry after Lent. It is the medieval miracle of mass preservation. It is salted herring, and it is your savior. Salted fish doesn't rot. That's the first thing to love about it. The second is that it's legal. The church says no meat on Fridays, no meat during Lent, no meat on Ember days, Rogation days, or half the calendar if the bishop is feeling pious. Which means if you want protein without sin, you turn to the sea even if you live hundreds of miles from the shore, because fish is allowed, which makes it holy, and in a world where pigs are property and cows are capital, that makes salted fish the people's meat. Herring is the king of them all, not because it tastes good, God, no, but because it travels. You've heard tales of boats so full of herring they nearly sank, of barrels stacked so high in the ports of Yarmouth and Bergen they blocked out the sun. During the herring season, fleets catch millions. They gut them, salt them, pack them tight into barrels, and ship them inland on wagons that creak under the weight of dead silver. You've seen them roll through the village. You've smelled them coming. Sharp, acrid, like death dipped in brine. And still you line up with your bowl and your coin. Because this is how you keep your family fed during Holy Weeks. This is how you obey the church and stay on your feet. This is how you don't starve. When you crack open a barrel, the fish stare back, lifeless, flat-eyed, bent like commas in a holy text you were never meant to read. You don't cook them, not unless you're fancy. You soak them maybe, rinse them, scrape off the crystals of salt that burn your fingers if you're not careful. Then you bite. The texture is somewhere between leather and regret. The taste is salt with notes of sadness. But the fat, oh the fat, sticks to your ribs like forgiveness. It keeps you moving. It keeps you warm. It keeps your child's bones from poking through their skin. You eat it with bread if you have it, with gruel if you don't, sometimes with ale, sometimes just with fingers and desperation. You eat it cold, hot, boiled, baked, chopped, mashed. You once made a paste of herring, peas, and turnip. Your father called it sin on a spoon. You made it again anyway. There are other fish, of course. If you're near a river, you might catch perch or eel. Eels are slimy, but rich. The monks love them. You've seen monastery kitchens roast them with onions and honey, though you've only ever had them smoked and scraped clean of slime. Sometimes you net carp, but only if the Lord lets you near the water. Sometimes you trap frogs and call them fish, just to keep the priest from scolding you. It's a slippery loophole, like the frog. But you need to eat. Inland, dried cod is the other holy meat. It's a block of wood until you soak it for a day. 2, if you want to chew it without losing a tooth. You boil it, bash it, curse it. Then you eat it. Because it's meat without sin. Because in Lent, when your body screams for bacon and your soul is told no, fish is the answer. But herring? Herring is what you dream of when the skies turn black. It's the peasant's perfume, the poor man's incense. Barrels of it lined the monastery cellars. Records show monks consuming hundreds of fish each week during fasts, each fish a tiny, salty martyr sacrificed on the altar of discipline. You once worked in a monastery kitchen during Holy Week, peeled open a barrel so thick with salt your fingers bled. But the brothers lined up all the same, thankful, silent, slightly green. The smell stays on your hands for days. Your wife refuses to sleep beside you after herring day. You once woke up with a cat chewing your beard because of the brine crusted in your mustache. You didn't blame it. You smelled like survival. Sometimes you wonder what the fish looked like in life. Bright, slippery, free. Then you remember how they look now, stacked, gutted, curled, and you feel a strange kinship. You, too, have been salted by the church, preserved by obedience, shipped far from where you began. You, too, are bent, but not broken. Fish is not luxury. Fish is necessity. It's not a delicacy, it's doctrine. It is what lets you obey God and still see spring. It is what lets the fasting be fasting, not dying. And still, on Easter morning when the ban is lifted, and the priest bites into ham, and the children taste fresh eggs again, you feel something unexpected. Not joy, Not even relief. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after chewing the same salted fish 50 times a year. The kind of silence that knows it'll be back on the table by Friday. And you say a quiet thank you, not to God, not to the priest, not to the fish, but to the barrel. The cracked, swollen barrel that never let you down. Sometimes, you wonder if the church made fasting rules for spiritual reasons, or just to keep the poor from hoarding pork. Because for all its sermons on abstinence, the priest still eats better than you. His fish is fresh, his butter is salted, his Lenten meal includes 5 courses and a pie made from almond milk and sweetened spices. You get a salted herring. 1, and it's already started to curl. But still, you obey. Because to break the rule is to break your standing in the village. It's to risk penance, shame, exclusion, punishments worse than hunger. And besides, you've learned to make the best of it. You've learned to soak your fish longer, to mash it with mashed peas, to spread it on flatbread, to wrap it in cabbage leaves and pretend it's something better. Once, on a festival day, you even made herring pie. It nearly set the thatch on fire, but it tasted like victory. You've heard of places where the church taxes salt, where barrels are locked behind walls, and only nobles may access the good stuff. But here, you have salt. Not much, not often, but enough. Enough to dry the blood from a slaughter, enough to pickle a handful of turnip, enough to keep a fish from turning. Salt is power, and power, once in the hands of the sea, now lives in your pantry, in a cracked jar tucked behind a basket of beans. Enough to last the winter, maybe? If you ration. If you're careful, if the rats don't find it. Fish has taught you the value of patience, of soaking, scraping, boiling, of watching a pot for hours, waiting for a meal that doesn't reward effort with flavor. It's not about pleasure, it's about survival. Fish isn't food, it's fuel, a loophole, a sacrament packed in brine. And for all its smell, for all its stiffness, for all its unwelcome return, week after week, you're grateful for it. You'll eat it again. On Friday. And every Friday after that, until the barrel runs dry. Or the hunger runs deeper. Whichever comes first. You don't trust the water. No one does. You've seen what it does to people. Watched children double over from cramps after drinking from a muddy stream. Seen your neighbor grow pale and vanish in a week after drawing from the wrong well. You may not know what bacteria is, but you know what sickness looks like. That's why you drink ale. Not because you're celebrating, not because you're an alcoholic, but because you want to live. Your day starts with ale, ends with ale. You drink it with bread, with pottage, with salted fish. You've drunk it while digging a ditch, birthing a calf, burying a child. It's not strong. Not the kind that gets you singing dirty songs in the tavern. This is small ale, barely 1% or 2% alcohol, just enough to purify, not enough to party. You brew it at home. Everyone does, mostly the women. You've seen your mother boiling grain in the hearth, stirring until the bubbles nearly burn her hands. You've helped her strain it through linen, watched her cool it in clay jugs, added sprigs of herbs for flavor, which usually means not revolting. Then you wait. A day. 2, and the ale is ready. Cloudy, flat, warm, but safe. You don't drink it to get drunk. You drink it so your insides don't rot. You drink it because the water could kill you, and the ale only makes you burp. Records say the average medieval peasant drinks a gallon of ale per day. You believe it. It's not indulgence. It's hydration. It's calories. It's comfort. It's currency. You've been paid in ale. You've bought firewood with ale. You once proposed to a girl with a jug of your family's strongest brew. She said yes. Then threw up behind the barn. You married her anyway. You've seen stronger stuff, too. Cider, made from windfall apples gathered by the bushel in the fall. You smash them in wooden presses, catch the juice in buckets, and leave it to bubble until it turns sharp and gold. The poor man's wine, easier to make than ale. Sweeter, too, at least at first, until it bites back. You sip it on feast days, weddings, the end of harvest. A jug passed hand to hand around a smoking fire. Laughter, singing. That one cousin who always gets naked after 3 cups. It warms your belly more than it should, reminds you that you have a belly to warm. Then there's mead, the golden ghost. You've only tasted it twice in your life, once at Easter, once at a funeral. Both times you were too young to understand what luxury it was. Mead is for those with bees. And bees are expensive. Still, some clever peasants keep them. Hollowed logs, clay hives hidden near wildflowers. You've helped collect honey once dressed in rags, face-wrapped, moving slow as prayer. The bees still stung, but the honey, worth every welt. Sweet, thick, sacred. The mead you made from it ran hot down your throat. Your knees went weak. Your mother said you looked like a bishop, tasting heaven. You never forgot it. Ale is daily life. Cider is reward. Mead is myth. And together, they keep you alive. They hydrate you, feed you, let you pretend you're not just surviving, but choosing to survive with flavor. You don't have wine, that's for priests and lords. You have ale. You have a jug with a chipped rim and a smell that never quite goes away. And you hold it like a chalice, because it has kept you standing, even when your legs tremble, even when the crops fail, even when your throat is too dry to cry. You've watched men die of thirst next to a stream. You've watched children drink river water and then stop drinking anything, forever. But you've never seen someone die from small ale. Not once. You teach your children to drink it. From the cup, from the jug, with bread, without. You remember your first taste. Foamy, warm, bitter. You remember your son's first taste. Confused, then delighted, then loud. Now he asks for it with every meal, like it's his birthright. And in a way, it is. Because in a land where food is uncertain, water is dangerous, and medicine is prayer. Ale is security. The barrels in your cottage are as important as the grain in your field. You roll them, patch them, refill them, curse them when they leak, thank them when they don't. Sometimes, when the night is long and the work is done, you sit by the fire with a half-empty mug and wonder how many days this brew has bought you. Then you drink, because you can, because it's yours, because for all the things you lack, you've never lacked this. You once tried to go a day without it, just to see. You lasted until noon. Your mouth dried up, your stomach churned. You started to sweat not from thirst, but from memory. A creeping sense of absence, like something essential had slipped through your fingers. By dusk, you gave in, drank a mug so fast you choked on the foam. And just like that, you were back. Not drunk, not merry, just right. You've seen people try to outlaw it. A bishop once claimed ale led to idleness, that if the poor drank less, they'd work harder, pray more, sin less. The village ignored him, because no one sins less when they're dying of thirst. There's an old man who lives by the edge of the woods, a beekeeper, half blind, one hand. But his mead? It could make a monk break his vows. Every midsummer he trades jars for eggs, barley, and gossip. On feast nights he drinks with the young men, sings bawdy songs with the old ones, tells stories with lips sticky from honey and memory. You've never had the courage to ask for his recipe. You just hope he never dies. Or if he does, that someone writes it down. Because mead like that doesn't taste like alcohol. It tastes like time. like flowers crushed underfoot, like sun on your shoulders, like what the world could be if the lords forgot how to count coin and the priests forgot how to speak Latin. You've poured ale on the ground for the dead. You've toasted births with cider. You've whispered confessions to a mug when no priest would listen. Your jug is your altar. Your brew is your blessing. And when your hands shake from hunger, when the cold slips under your skin and curls into your bones, a mouthful of warm ale can feel like a miracle. One winter, your supply ran out. The grain had gone to seed. The wood was too wet for a fire. The pot cracked in the frost. You drank snowmelt instead. Your son fell ill. You held him as he shook and burned, his body fighting water like it was poison. You prayed. You begged. You boiled every jug you could find. But the ale was gone. You never forgot that. You never let the barrels run empty again. When spring came, you brewed with bark and wild herbs just to get something drinkable. It worked. Barely. You called it brown courage. You drank it with shaking hands and a full heart, because even if it tasted like smoke and twigs, it tasted like life. There are days when the ale hits different. Not because it's stronger, not because it's warmer, but because of where you are when you drink it. By a fire after the harvest, in the field with dirt still under your nails, beside a friend who's said nothing all day, but shares their jug without asking. It's those days you remember most. Not the taste, not the smell, but the feeling of being held together, not by law, not by God, but by grain and yeast and quiet human stubbornness. One time, during the plague years, a monk came through the village, face covered, robe stiff with travel. He had no sermons, no blessings. Just a small clay flask of ale that he'd brewed himself in the mountains. He gave it to your father, said it had been blessed. Your father didn't believe him, but he drank it anyway. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Maybe it was just the warmth, maybe it was the yeast, maybe it was nothing. But you still remember that flask. Still remember the way your father's eyes crinkled, just for a moment. Like he remembered something sweet. Something from before. Something almost worth toasting. You don't live for sweetness. You live for calories, warmth, and whatever doesn't rot before morning. But sweetness? That's something else. That's hope with a flavor. And it comes to you in fleeting golden moments like sunlight breaking through smoke, or a dream you forget as soon as you wake up. It starts with honey. If you're lucky, someone in the village keeps bees, not in neat wooden hives like the nobles have, but in hollow logs, straw skeps, or cracked clay pots stuffed with wildflowers and blind hope. The bees don't like being bothered. They defend their treasure with fire and sting. You've helped raid a hive once. Smoke in your face, thick gloves, a prayer whispered to St. Ambrose. The moment the wax gave way and the comb broke open, you understood why it was all worth it. Thick, golden, sticky, liquid sunlight. You carried that dripping slab home like it was a holy relic. The smell filled the cottage for hours. You scraped the comb into porridge, licked the bowl clean, rubbed it on a sore lip, let a drop fall on your tongue, and swore you'd never complain again. You did. But for a moment, you believed yourself. Most years, there is no honey, or what little there is goes to the lord, the priest, or the healer. You've seen old women trade a teaspoon of it for a length of thread. You've seen a dying man refuse bread but take a smear of honey on his gums. You've seen mothers save the last drop to give their child a sweet memory before a fever takes them. Honey isn't food. It's grace. It doesn't fill your belly. It fills something deeper. Then there are the berries. Not grown in gardens, not sold at market, just gathered, foraged, stolen from bushes before the birds can beat you to them. You send children out with baskets made of bark and willow. Tell them to go where the nettles sting and the thorns grow thick. They come back bleeding but grinning. Blackberries with skins like night. Gooseberries that burst sour and sweet. Wild strawberries so small they vanish on the tongue. You mash them into pottage, stir them into porridge, eat them by the handful before they can spoil. No one stores berries. You eat them now or not at all. There was a summer once warm, wet, thick with bees when berries grew so thick along the fence row they dyed the ground purple. You ate until your lips turned black. You kissed someone with sticky teeth. You laughed like you weren't hungry. You still remember that taste. And you chase it every year. On feast days, if the larder permits, you might mix honey with milk. Boil it until it thickens. Add in a single crushed almond saved from last year's trade. You call it a pudding. The children call it magic. The priest calls it excess. You give him none. When the honey runs out, you sweeten your food with apples. Or dried plums, if you can find them. Or the last of the cider, poured into a pot to soften bitter bread. You once heard of sugar, a white powder that lives in the east and costs more than a pig. You've never tasted it. You don't believe in it. But sweetness can come from more than food. It comes in a warm mug after a hard day. In the laughter of your sister when the gruel boils over. In the sticky kisses of a child who's found a half-rotted pear behind the woodshed and insists on sharing it with you. It comes in surprise. In tiny, precious interruption. A raisin baked into bread. A honeyed carrot in a stew, a birthday with a dried fig, and no one dying. You save sweets for mourning, for healing, for birth, for begging the gods not to take someone else. You save them for what matters. And if you ever waste a drop, may the bees curse your name. Once, in the dead of winter, a merchant passed through your village with dried fruit dates, he called them. Brown, wrinkled, stuffed into a cloth sack that smelled like desert winds and spilled wine. He let the children smell them for free, charged the adults in coin. You bought one. Just one. Traded 2 eggs and half a heel of bread. He looked at you like you were mad. You didn't care. You brought it home, split it in 4, gave a piece to each child and the last to your wife. Watched their faces twist in wonder at the flavor. They didn't say thank you, they just ate. You didn't need thanks. That night, you slept full not in body, but in memory. The thing about sweetness is that it doesn't last. It rots, it dries, it vanishes. And that's what makes it powerful. Because in a life where most things are constant mud, toil, cold, hunger, sweetness is rare. It's not a staple, it's a whisper. A reminder that joy exists somewhere, even if only for a moment. Children hunt sweetness like foxes. They chew on roots, suck on grass stems, lick the last dribble of honey from the spoon, and fight over who gets to scrape the pot. You don't stop them. You remember what it was like to be 6 years old and believe that a berry bush was a gift from heaven. You still believe it, if you're honest. There's an old tale about a boy who stole honey from the monastery stores and was struck blind by Saint Mary herself. You don't believe it. You think he tripped on a stone and the monks needed an excuse. But still, you keep the honey jar out of reach. Just in case. Some seasons, there's no sweetness at all. No fruit, no berries. The bees flee, the apples rot early, the figs are worm-ridden, the wine spoils in the barrel, and even the cider turns too sour to drink. That's when the dreams come. You wake up at night, tasting honey that isn't there. You watch your children gnaw dry bread, and remember the plum tart your aunt made 10 years ago on the last day of summer, when the fields were gold and everyone believed it would last. It didn't. But the taste lingers. On weddings, you give sweets as gifts. Not cloth, not coin. Just a wrapped lump of preserved fruit, if you have it, or a twist of honeycomb sealed in wax. Something simple, something earned. You've seen grown men cry at the sight of a sugar-dusted bun, not because they were drunk, but because someone cared enough to give them sweetness. And in this life, that's not small. That's a miracle. Your mother used to say that too much sweetness made the soul lazy, that bitter food built better people. You half believed her, until the day she got sick and your father spent 3 whole days searching the hedgerow for wild strawberries because she once told him they reminded her of the summer they met. He found 6, laid them in her lap like gems. She smiled so hard her lips cracked. You never doubted sweetness again. The healer uses it too, not just for taste but for strength. She stirs honey into bitter herbs, crushes dried berries into powders, sweetens broth for the dying. Her cupboard smells of mint, smoke, and fruit left out too long. When you're sick, she feeds you a syrup so sweet it hurts your teeth. But it helps. Not because it cures the fever, but because it tells your body, you are not forgotten. You've once had dried pears. Once sliced thin and left in the attic to harden in the wind. They curled into gold coins, sharp around the edges, chewy as leather. You bit down, expecting dust. But instead, you got flavor. Soft, floral, alive. You closed your eyes, and for one bite, the world wasn't grey anymore. Sweetness teaches you to slow down, to notice, to remember, because nothing so rare can be rushed. You sip the cider instead of gulping. Let the honey dissolve on your tongue. Take small bites of the only preserved plum you'll taste all year. It's not about filling your stomach. It's about filling your life. You've buried people with sweets in their pockets, not for nourishment in the afterlife, but because you hope wherever they're going it's not as bitter as here. And if it is, at least they'll have one good taste left. When the fields fail you, the forest waits. It does not welcome. It does not comfort. It endures. And sometimes, when winter leans in too hard and the grain runs out and the turnips turn soft and the barrels stand dry, you follow the deer paths. Because out there, beneath leaf and shadow, might be the difference between life and death. You carry a basket, a knife, a sack made from torn linen. No coin, no map, just hunger. You search under leaves, crack open fallen branches, dig at roots with your fingers. Pray for something, anything with color. You are not looking for food. You are looking for mercy, and sometimes the forest gives a nut, a leaf, a bitter bulb not yet rotted by frost. Sometimes it gives more. Chestnuts are the first treasure. They fall in autumn, thick and round, hidden in prickled husks that slice your hands but keep the squirrels honest. You roast them on stones, boil them to mash, dry them and grind them into flour that doesn't rise, but fills the stomach all the same. They taste earthy, mealy, sweet, if you're lucky, but mostly they taste like relief. There are families that survive whole winters on chestnut cakes alone. One tree, one season, and enough care can feed 4 mouths until spring. They're called the bread of the trees. And when your field gives nothing, you turn to the bark and pray the forest will bake instead. Then come the acorns. Not by choice, by necessity, because chestnuts run out, or rot, or the pigs get to them first. And acorns are always there, bitter, tannin-rich, poisonous if you eat them raw, but you're desperate, so you soak them, over and over, in buckets, in flowing water, in buried clay pots. The bitter leaches out, the starch stays in. It takes days, sometimes weeks, but at the end, you have something close to food. You grind it, mix it with turnip flour, shape it into flat cakes, and cook it on stones, praying they don't crack your teeth. You call it bread, You chew with your eyes closed. You tell your children it tastes better than last year. You lie. The records don't talk much about bark. But you know bark. You've scraped it from elder trees in March, peeled it from birch in November, boiled it with bones to make broth thick enough to coat your lips in sap. It's not food. Not really. But it's something to chew. Something to hold in your mouth when hunger makes your stomach eat itself. You've seen it work. You've seen it fail. You've seen men eat too much and vomit behind the shed. You've seen women feed it to babies who stopped crying hours ago. Bark doesn't save, but it delays. And sometimes that's all you need. You know the plants, too. Not from books, from memory, from whispers, from watching your grandmother pull nettles with her bare hands and say, "Better stung than starved." You boil nettles, fry chickweed, add wild onions to whatever hasn't rotted in the pot. You collect leaves so bitter they burn the back of your throat, but they bring color to your cheeks and wake up your blood. You eat flowers in spring, roots in summer, mushrooms in fall, only the ones you know. You remember the Thompsons, all dead from a single stew. Wrong mushroom, right desperation. In famine years, the woods are busy. Every path is worn, every bush picked bare. The squirrels go hungry, the foxes grow bold. You meet neighbors in places you used to call quiet. You nod. Don't speak. Everyone is trying to pretend this is just a stroll, not survival. Sometimes you get lucky. You find a fallen log soft with beetle larvae. You scoop them out, drop them in the pan, roast them till they pop. They taste like walnuts if you lie hard enough. You find wild apples, gnarled, sour, speckled with rot, but edible. You bring them home, like gold. Your wife makes a stew with the last of the lentils and one of those apples. It tastes like memory, like something you thought was gone. You've watched children learn which seeds to spit and which flowers to eat. You've watched elders sit under trees they planted 60 years ago, waiting for the nuts to drop. You've buried people beside the same trees, their final meal provided by the forest that outlasted them. You don't own the woods. The Lord says you can't hunt there, can't cut the trees, can't snare rabbits or trap birds or pick herbs without his blessing. You do it anyway, quietly, quickly, carefully, because you're not stealing. You're surviving. You've seen laws written on parchment that say, "No peasant shall gather without leave." But you've also seen your sister dig for roots under moonlight, barefoot and quiet, just to feed her son. You've seen old men fined for picking herbs that grew beside their father's grave. You've watched a woman whipped for taking a bundle of dry sticks that no one else even noticed. The forest may save you, but the Lord owns your salvation, and if he catches you, he'll make sure you pay for it. So you learn the boundaries. You forage where no hoofprints show. You carry baskets made from clothes, not wood so they don't clatter. You pull leaves in silence and bury your fire when you cook them. Because in this world, eating quietly is safer than starving publicly. The forest is your market, your garden, your apothecary, but it is also your judge. It punishes carelessness. You've stepped in wasp nests. You've eaten spoiled roots. You've slipped on wet moss with a full basket and broken 2 ribs. And the next morning, you still went back. Because it was that, or to your child cry with an empty belly. You know the good trees by heart. Hazel, oak, beech. You know which ones give early, which ones hide their gifts, which ones keep their branches until frost strips them clean. You once spent an entire day gathering nuts, then lost the whole sack in the river crossing home. You wept like a widow, and then you turned around and went back. You remember how your grandfather stored chestnuts buried in sand beneath the floorboards, kept them fresh till March. You do the same now, because those nuts aren't food. They're time. Weeks of life in every pile. Days of warmth. Meals you don't have to explain. They're your insurance policy against famine. Your answer to every grim question. When the forest is kind, you call it blessing. When it's cruel, you call it test. But either way, you return. You return because the fields don't care. Because the soil forgets you. Because the weather answers to no one. But the trees, remember? They remember where your mother dug wild onions. Where your uncle planted mushrooms after a lucky harvest. Where you wept and buried the last of your spoiled grain. The forest is not gentle, but it is there. And when the famine comes, when the people start scraping lichen off stones, when the rats disappear from the traps because they've all been eaten, when even the priest stops pretending things are fine, it is the forest that gives your village its last chance. Not the Lord, not the church, not the soil, but the trees, the roots, the weeds, that which grows without permission, that which doesn't care about your title, your tax, your guilt, or your prayers. One day, when you are old, you will walk your children into the forest. You will show them which leaves sting and which soothe. You will teach them the sound of good nuts falling, the smell of bad mushrooms, the bend of branches where the berries hide. You will tell them the truth. The forest feeds those who remember what it gave them. And then you will hand them a basket, and hope they never need it. You've eaten bark, you've boiled weeds, you've scraped the soot from the inside of the hearth and stirred it into broth. But now, there's nothing left to scrape. Not from the fields, not from the forest, not from the corners of the grain jar where the mice used to hide. And so you do what the dying do last. You make ash cakes, not because they're good, not because they're food, but because they are the final ritual between a peasant and starvation. It starts with whatever powder you have, a handful of acorn flour, the last sweepings from the millstone, dust from the bottom of the grain bin, floor swept, mouse touched, possibly half dirt. You mix it with water, maybe salt if there's still a pinch left. If not, spit will do. You stir it into a paste that resists both form and flavor. You shape it into a lump, not a loaf, not a roll, a lump, and then you bury it in the fire. Not beside the fire, not on a clean stone or an iron plate. You bury it in the ash, in the coals, in the still glowing memory of yesterday's warmth, and you wait. There is no smell, no rising steam, just smoke, just grit, just a faint, dry hiss, like the sound of winter chewing through your roof. You dig it out with a stick, tap the worst of the ashes off, blow on it once, twice, then take a bite. It's hot, dry, it cracks, it sticks to your teeth like burnt bark. You chew and chew and chew, and still, it does not become food, but it becomes something else. It becomes survival. Ash cakes are not a meal. They're a message, a way of telling your body, not yet. You're not dead. Not today. Not while there's still wood to burn and water to boil and flour to fake. You've heard it said that ash cakes saved entire villages during the Great Famine, that women baked them with tears in their eyes and babies on their backs, that children sang songs about them, quiet songs whispered under breath so the hunger wouldn't hear. You believe it. You've lived it. Your father called them grave bread. Your grandmother called them god cakes. Your cousin swore they were the reason his youngest survived the plague winter. You don't call them anything anymore. You just eat. You eat them with silence, with cracked hands and a gut that has learned the language of emptiness, with a prayer that doesn't ask for miracles just one more morning. Sometimes you get creative. Add dried grass, mix in boiled roots, spread a smear of old lard across the top to pretend it's something better. Sometimes, in a fit of humour so dry it could splinter wood, you offer one to your neighbour like it's a gift. They laugh. Then they eat it. There's no shame in ash cakes. Not when everyone else is making them, too. Not when the Lord's own steward was seen pulling scraps from the stable floor. Not when the church pantry is locked and the rats have disappeared and the birds haven't sung in 3 weeks. You remember the first time you made one. You were young. Your mother let you mix the water. Said it was a skill everyone had to learn. You didn't understand then. Thought it was a game. Laughed when it crumbled in your hands. She didn't laugh. Now you understand. Now you mix the paste the same way. Slowly. With a hollow sort of care. Like dressing a wound you know won't heal. Some people say, the ashes give flavor. That the bitterness is good for the blood. You don't care. You eat them because the body needs chewing, needs something to believe in. And ash is as close to belief as you can afford. You've heard of people dying with a half-eaten ash cake beside them. Not because it poisoned them, because they were already halfway gone. Because even the illusion of bread wasn't enough anymore. You've seen it yourself. A man chewing without swallowing. A woman who made cakes every day but never ate. Said they were for the children. She died in her sleep with flour on her fingers. And still, the cakes were there in the morning. Waiting? You don't let anything go to waste. Not the flour, not the fire, not even the ashes. When the wind blows hard and the roof groans, you gather what's left of last night's burn and sift it through your hands. Looking for anything. A clump, a chunk, something that hasn't turned to dust. Once, you made a cake out of nothing but ash and water. No flour at all. You told yourself it was different. It wasn't, but it was warm, and that was enough. Some people say ash cakes are peasant sorcery, that they're a way to cheat hunger, to fool death into waiting. You don't believe in magic. But when the pot is empty and the air smells like snow, you'd try anything. Even making bread from fire. Especially then, you've seen better days. Days with butter, with cheese, with meat so thick it dripped fat onto your hands. But those are stories now, told between bites of ash, between winters, between heartbeats. And you keep telling them, because maybe, just maybe next year, you won't have to eat ash. Maybe the rains will come. Maybe the barley will hold. Maybe the bees will stay. Maybe your hands won't shake when you shape the cakes. Maybe your children will eat fruit again. But until then, you bake. You stir, you shape, you bury, you wait. And when the smoke clears, you eat. Because if you don't, you won't get the chance to remember what bread used to taste like. You never write the recipe down. There's no need. It lives in your hands, in the rhythm of your stirring, in the silence between bites. You could teach it to your children without speaking. Just a bowl, a splash of water, the blackened half, and a look that says, "This is what we do now." There's a grim pride in knowing how to make something from nothing, in turning ash's symbol of endings into a beginning, even if only for one more night. You've taught others, the widow with 7 mouths to feed, the boy who lost both parents and burns every pot he touches. You show them, not kindly, not cruelly, just matter of fact, because kindness doesn't feed you, and cruelty wastes breath. But knowledge? Knowledge might save a life. Ash cakes don't forgive, they don't nourish, but they remember. They remember every field that failed, every storehouse that emptied, every harvest that shriveled under skies too bright or too black. They're baked grief, burnt desperation pressed into shape. A symbol, sure, but also a reality. You remember the winter the Lord left, rode south with his guards and his grain, leaving the village to rot. No coin, no relief. Just an empty manor, and a locked storehouse with weevils gnawing at the walls. That's the year everyone ate ash cakes, morning, noon, and night. By the end, they joked about it black bread for black days, they said. But no one laughed too hard, because by then, you all knew someone who hadn't made it. They say your body can survive 20 days without food. That's a lie. Or if it's true, it doesn't feel like survival. It feels like forgetting how to stand. Like your muscles are vanishing one by one. Like your teeth are too heavy. Like your own shadow weighs more than your limbs. Ash cakes don't fix that, but they slow it, delay the fade, trick your mouth into chewing long enough to believe the end isn't so close. That maybe you're just tired, just cold, just waiting for the next thing to grow. You once made a batch from floor sweepings and dried grass, called them church bread, took them to the priest who kept preaching about suffering as virtue. He didn't eat them, said he was fasting, said the saints endured worse. You left them on his doorstep and walked home chewing the last one yourself. It tasted like dust, but it didn't kill you. That was enough. You've made ash cakes with beetroot flour, with bark shavings, with mushroom stems so old they crumbled at the touch. You've seen them baked on hearthstones, on iron spades, even wrapped in leaves and buried in coals like sacred things. Not sacred, but they are ours. The nobles never eat ash cakes. The monks have never tasted one, and that's how you know who's never been hungry. You save one, always, wrapped in cloth, hidden in the back corner of the shelf. You tell yourself it's for emergencies, but really, it's for remembrance. A burnt-edged relic of survival. You look at it some days and feel stronger just knowing it's there. Because to hold one is to remember you've endured worse. And you might endure again. You don't plan meals. Not like the steward does, scratching menus on parchment and sending servants to fetch the goose, the garlic, the grapes that haven't yet wrinkled. You don't have parchment, or servants, or grapes. What you have is whatever's left. A half turnip, 3 beans, a cup of week-old gruel, a heel of bread so hard it could knock out a rat, 2 wild onions, and a bone so thoroughly boiled it whistles when you shake it. And so, you make dinner. You make it like your mother did. Like her mother did. Like every woman and man who ever stood in a peasant kitchen staring down a table full of nothing and pulling together something. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't follow rules. It just begins. You take the pot, the same blackened, cracked-bottom pot that's been used for everything from boiling pottage to washing feet, and you throw in what you've got. You don't measure. You don't taste. You trust your hands, your nose, the weight of a habit passed down through hunger and hope. You fill the gaps with whatever makes it less awful. A pinch of dried nettle, a smear of lard saved from a feast day, a spoonful of yesterday's soup thinner now, but still holding the ghost of salt and fat. And you stir, and you wait, and you pray that the fire doesn't go out. You've made meals with no more than 4 ingredients. You've made meals with 12. You've made meals with 0, and still managed to fool your child into thinking the broth was filling. It's not a trick. It's a skill. A sacred one. You don't read recipes. You read faces. You watch for the moment your husband stops chewing and just swallows. For the flicker in your child's eyes when the stew tastes different than usual. For the way your own hands tremble less after a second bowl. That's how you know it's enough. Not good, not grand, but enough. You've made soup with bread crusts and beet leaves. You've baked pies with turnip mash and sour apples. You once made a porridge so thick and gluey you served it in slices. The monk who tasted it said it reminded him of humility. You said it reminded you of your uncle's boots. He didn't laugh, but he ate 2 portions. There are no rules for these meals. No, first you saute. No, boil for 10 minutes. No, garnish with fresh thyme. There's just what's edible and what's not, green with mold. Even then, you're flexible. You've scraped mold from cheese, cut the soft parts off onions, boiled spoiled milk into something not quite disgusting. It's not bravery. It's routine. You once made stew from pottage, ale, dried beans, and the leftover bits of squirrel from someone's trap. You didn't ask who caught it, you just stirred. Added salt. Watched it simmer like it belonged there. It smelled like warmth. Tasted like not dying. Your family still talks about it. You wish you remembered how you made it. But that's the thing with these meals. They're like dreams. You live in them once. Then they're gone. Sometimes you combine things just to clean the shelf. A handful of peas, the last of the cabbage water, a sprig of something that might be rosemary, or might be a twig. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Once you made a broth so foul the cat gagged. You laughed, then drank it anyway. Because hunger is funnier than pride. There's comfort in the chaos. In not knowing what dinner will be until it's bubbling. In letting the pot decide. You've seen nobles turn their noses up at such meals. Seen them mock your soups, your stews, your bread crusts soaked in fat and served like fine fare. Let them laugh. They wouldn't last a week in your kitchen. Because you can feed a family of 6 with what they throw away. Some of your best meals were born from accidents. The loaf that burned and crumbled into stew. The spoiled milk that turned into a tangy porridge. The sausage ends forgotten at the back of the shelf and rediscovered on feast day. It's not art. It's not alchemy. It's adaptation. You adapt. Because the seasons don't ask. Because the taxes don't wait. Because your children don't stop growing just because the wheat stopped sprouting. You've had guests. Rare, but it happens. A cousin passing through. A traveling merchant who remembered your kindness. The local healer after your youngest scraped his knee to the bone. You never apologize for what you serve. You smile. Offer a bowl. A spoon. A seat. And you say, "It's what we had." Sometimes they cry. You've heard the priest say that simplicity is holy, that the poor are blessed, that heaven is fed on crumbs and prayers. You don't know about that, but you do know that a good meal, made from nothing, can silence even the sharpest hunger. That's close enough to a miracle for you. You've seen feast tables in the manor hall, long boards groaning under roast birds, and glazed fruits in silver goblets filled to the brim. They call it hospitality, they call it wealth. But you've seen more generosity in a bowl of leftover pottage shared between neighbors. You've tasted more satisfaction in a turnip mash, cooked with wild herbs and a single drop of pork fat. Because it isn't what you cook that makes the meal. It's that you cooked it all. It's that you scraped together scraps and made them into something warm, something filling, something yours. You've seen people cry over a ladle of stew that reminded them of their mother. You've watched old men go quiet after biting into a bread that tasted like the one their wife made 30 years ago. You've fed children food they didn't recognize and told them it was called good enough, and they believed you, and then they asked for more. You've learned the rhythm of using what you have. If the bread is too hard, you soak it. If the soup is too thin, you thicken it with grain. If the cabbage is starting to turn, you boil it down and serve it with vinegar and garlic to hide the smell. If it's meat, you stretch it. You boil the bones twice. You add it to everything, not for substance, but for memory. Meat makes it feel like a real meal, even when it's not. And when you run out, you tell stories instead. You talk about the last pig slaughter, the stew that tasted like something from the king's table, the day someone caught a duck and shared it with the whole row of cottages. It doesn't fill the stomach, but it fills the room, and that matters. You've stored turnip leaves in vinegar, hung onions in the rafters, left parsnips in the ground until they sweetened in the frost. Nothing is wasted, not even the water from boiling vegetables. That goes back into soup, or into bread, or into your hands to warm them on a cold morning. You've fried porridge, scraped pottage from the pot bottom and called it crust pie, mashed boiled peas with lard until they resembled something hearty, and you've eaten it all with your head held high, because shame is for those who don't know how to survive. Your table has held meals that shouldn't be called meals, but were. Things that had no right to nourish you, but did. Things that other people would call slop or slush or garbage. But to you, they were everything. They were skill. They were endurance. They were proof that no matter how little you had, you still had enough. When someone new joins the village, lost a farm, lost a husband, fled a war, you bring them food. Not coin, not tools, a bowl, a spoon, a seat by the fire, and they know they're safe. Because in a world where nothing is promised, the one promise you can keep is this: we may have nothing, but together we'll eat. It ends with bread. It always ends with bread. Not cake, not custard, not cheese or cream, not even apples in autumn, or the last spoon of honey saved for feast days. No matter what came before the pottage, the gruel, the salted fish, the bitter greens boiled into forgettable broth, it ends with bread. Because bread is what holds it all together. Bread is what lingers. The crust shared between siblings, the torn end dipped into stew, the thick slice passed quietly from mother to child when there's nothing else left on the table. Bread is not special, and yet it is everything. It's the first thing you taste when you're weaned, the first thing you chew after illness, the offering you take to the dying, the thing you make when you don't know what else to make. You've eaten it every day of your life. And still, when it's fresh, when the crust cracks, and the steam slips out like a ghost, you pause. You breathe in. You remember. Because bread remembers too. It remembers the harvests, the droughts, the taxes, the sicknesses, the celebrations when the Lord had a son, the days the village baked together in the communal oven, the nights the dough rose slowly in the corner of the hearth, wrapped in cloth and silence. You've made bread with flour from rye, from barley, from beans and roots and husks swept from the floor. You've made it with sour ale and river water and salt scraped from a drying stone. You've made it with hope, with resignation, with the simple knowledge that if you don't eat this, you won't eat at all. You've eaten it soft, crusty, mouldy, flat, burned, raw in the center, so hard it cracked a tooth, so light it vanished on the tongue. You've toasted it, fried it, smeared it with drippings, soaked it in soup. You've used it to wipe the last of the meal from your plate. And that is where it ends. That is where the hunger folds itself up, for now. With bread. Always bread. You've taught your children to make it. Not in a lesson, but in a rhythm. How to knead. How to judge the flour by feel, not by sight. How to pat the top just right so the crust cracks but doesn't break. How to know when the dough is too wet, or too dry, or too angry to rise. You don't use measurements, you use instinct. You use memory. The memory of your grandmother's hands, scarred and strong, covered in flour every morning before sunrise. The memory of bread shared after burial, after birth, after harvest, after war. You've broken bread with strangers, with kin, with people you once swore never to speak to again, because bread doesn't need words. Bread forgives what mouths can't. In your village, bread is currency, trade, gesture, peace offering, gift. A loaf on a doorstep means you are not forgotten. A slice slipped to a child during Mass means they are still loved. You've seen people argue over it, steal it, cry for it, die without it. You've seen people live because of it. Once, during the famine, a boy gave his only crust to a blind man. said he'd already eaten. Everyone knew he hadn't, but no one stopped him. That boy grew up with nothing but a name that made people smile. Because people remember bread. They remember who shared it. You've taken communion once. Just once. The priest gave you a wafer, dry and thin and tasteless, and said it was the body of Christ. You chewed and nodded, but you didn't understand, because to you, bread is not symbolic. It is real. It is the body of your father, bent over a field at dawn. It is the sweat of your mother's brow. It is the warmth that kept your baby quiet through the night. It is the reason your people still rise each morning, battered but breathing. It is not sacred because of a prayer. It is sacred because it is what remained. At the end of every day, every story, every life, you've seen people buried with bread in their pockets. Not to eat, just to carry with them, just in case. You've heard the rich say that bread is peasant food, that real meals require courses, spices, meats carved thin and served on silver. Let them say it. You know the truth. Bread is the first bite of survival, and the last bite of grace. You've eaten better. You've eaten worse. But when the world quiets, when the fire is low and the sky is dark and everyone else is asleep, you take a piece of bread, tear it in half, and press it to your lips. And in that moment, for just a heartbeat, you are full. You've seen loaves sliced for guests, quartered for children, halved for neighbors. You've seen the last piece go to the dog because it's earned its place, too. Bread doesn't ask questions. It answers them. Am I fed? Am I seen? Am I still here? Even when it's stale. Especially then, you know how to stretch it. Slice it thin and soak it in broth. Dry it until it becomes croutons for soup. Fry it in a smear of lard for something that almost tastes like luxury. Crumble it into milk for the youngest child. Wrap it in cloth for the one who's going to walk all day and needs something to carry. Bread is never wasted. Not in this life. You've heard tales of lands where bread is thrown away, of tables so full they let it go moldy untouched. You don't believe it, not really. How could someone look at bread and not see the sweat it took to grow the grain, grind the flour, knead the dough, light the fire? How could they forget what it means? You've cried over bread, the first loaf after the long winter, the last one before the famine began, the one you baked for someone who didn't make it through the week. You remember everyone, because you don't just eat bread. You live with it. Its smell is part of the air. Its crumbs trail through your pockets, across your floor, into the cracks of the old table, where 100 hands have reached and torn and shared. You don't eat alone, even when you are, because someone's always shared bread with you once, and you carry that memory like a crust in your pocket. You've given bread to someone crying, watched the chewing still their sobs. You've broken bread between two people who hadn't spoken in months, watched them soften, nod, pass the rest without a word. Because bread mends what pride cannot. You've made it in silence, during grief, kneading into the dough every word you didn't say. You've made it in joy, humming to yourself, the dough springy and warm beneath your palms like the promise of good news. It's not just food, it's time, folded, risen, baked into something that remembers your hands and feeds your future. Your mother taught you to check for doneness by tapping the bottom. Listen for the hollow sound, she said. The sign it's ready. You still do it. Every time. You've tapped loaves in the dark, in the quiet, in the crowded kitchen on feast days. You've done it so many times your hands know the sound by feel. Sometimes, you wonder if your life has the same sound. If one day, when it's over, someone will tap you gently and hear that same echo. The echo of readiness, of fullness, of having given everything you had to give. The truth is, you've eaten 1,000 kinds of bread. Good, bad, strange, forgotten, but they all lead here to the end of the table, to the last bite, to the quiet chewing as the candle burns low. And in that last bite is everything. The first hunger, the long road, the hands that kneaded before yours, the ones that will come after. The bread remembers, and because of that, so do you.